It's the Week 10 edition of the Coach's Corner here on Rivalry Family Media. Great to have you along with us once again, and great to have order restored to the schedule this week. Week 10 action. Leominster will find themselves on the road in Week 10 at Kelleher Field in Marlborough for the seemingly annual meeting between Leominster and Marlborough, off and on again at times, but seemingly an annual matchup, whether it's a playoff or a non-playoff game at this late date in the season between Leominster and Marlborough over the last decade. That's where we will head at the tail end of the week. We'll have the broadcast team all back together again. No split squad action here in Week 10. We'll have all that information for you as we continue through this edition of Coach's Corner. But I welcome Leominster High School head coach Devin Gates. And Coach, here we are. Before we get to Week 10 action, let's flash back, talk a little bit about Week 9. Of course, your matchup with Worcester Tech. This was a fascinating matchup for a lot of reasons. I think it checked off some of the things that I wanted to see in these non-playoff games for, whatever reason. It seems like over the last handful of years, and I think we could, speculate that coaches like playing teams that they're familiar with. They like playing, in theory, like opponents. They like playing teams that they feel they are evenly matched with. So it leads to situations where we don't get a lot of creativity. Week to week and year to year, we talk about, you get the same teams, they do rematches. It just doesn't make what is already a difficult circumstance any more interesting for the players, for the coaching staffs, and obviously for those of us as outsiders who generate the excitement and tell the stories of these games when you have these replays of matchups. So this game, I thought, was an incredibly fun starting point in that it took an opponent who Leominster maybe traditionally would not consider booking, put them on your schedule. And I thought my favorite part about the story, the more I got to learn about it, was that Coach Derek Robbins requested it. It's what he wanted for his program, for a 7-1 team that didn't qualify for the playoffs in their division. He said he wanted an experience for his kids, and he thought that experience began with going to Doyle Field and playing a historic football program. And to me, that is the kind of the baseline before the game even got played, was a really tremendous aspect to last week's action.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Coach Robbins. I think he's doing things the right way down at Worcester Tech, and he had the kids playing really, really tough. And the moment didn't seem like it was too big for them playing at Doyle. I try to press upon our kids, like, this is the weight that we carry. From being where you're from, and with the expectation, the tradition, and what we have to start playing up to. And just to point to this matchup as evidence of that. Like, other teams wish they could have the type of setup, the type of deal that we have here at Leominster, and guys really need to take that seriously and hold it with pride. And I think that resonated with a lot of our guys. And like I said, Coach Robbins, credit him for wanting to play up and and come up here and give his team a challenge. And it was a tough football game.
And that, to me, I think you're right. It does. It's a dual lesson, right? Because not often, I think you're so focused, I suppose, on wanting to stay in the moment and beat the team in front of you and just worry about that. It's hard to always, from a playing standpoint, I suppose, translate out what it means, about you. What does it say about you that an opponent wants to obviously choose to come and play in your facility, come and play your storied football program? And I suppose as a coaching staff, it really does serve as a great teachable moment to kind of remind players to appreciate what they do have that others don't have access to. And that begins with a legendary lineage with which you are one link in a very long chain of.
For sure. And guys, we can't take that stuff for granted. It can't, our guys can't just say this is another football game out at Doyle Field and we've been doing this since we were kids. And no, because eventually it's going to be over, and you're going to wish that you had those games back where, maybe you didn't play to the best of your ability, or maybe you didn't go out and give it everything on every play. That's why Leominster has been so successful throughout the years, and our guys need to recognize that. And it's something that's definitely at the forefront of what we're preaching here as on our staff and in our football program. That it's all part of the fabric of the community. The guys need to understand that when they're out there playing, it's not just for them, it's not just for their teammates, but it really is, for the whole city. Everybody takes this seriously. This is a football town, and a lot comes with that. So guys, we will make sure guys are aware of that and know who they're playing for.
And so often, of course, we talk about those kinds of things when we get in and around Thanksgiving, which, of course, we're into the month of November. So, of course, that starts to kind of crop up. That mystique starts to generate around. But you are correct in pointing out that that doesn't stop or begin and end every time Leominster and Fitchburg plays each other. What makes those games special and what is the root of all of that is the long lineage of success within these programs that go on years and years and years, in addition to a very long, of course, matchup and series playing one another. But of course, in order for any of that to matter, you have to have the story in both programs. And of course, that is something that you are, kind of representative of. A 12-time Super Bowl champion with what is, arguably one of the best, if not the best facility in central Massachusetts, certainly with lots of mystique and has been incredibly well cared for. All of those things coming together do build quite a bit. And I suppose maybe, and it's to the benefit, I suppose, of kids, maybe at times ignorance is bliss, but there are times where maybe you would like them to be a little more aware of all of that. There's a balance, I suppose, to be struck between youthful exuberance and ignorance and actually realizing kind of the weight with which you carry.
For sure. I mean, we obviously don't want to make it where it's such a big thing that it's affecting our play. But I just want guys to realize how special of a deal they have to be a part of this football program, to be a part of this legacy. And they owe it to themselves, they owe it to their teammates, and they owe it to those who came before them to go out there and play everything, be in the moment, play the best that they can. Every single rep, every single play out in that field, because playing at Doyle is special. Wearing the blue and white is special, and like I said, it's not going to last forever. And these guys going, graduating in June and wishing they had done something different, or wishing they had left, didn't leave anything out on the field.
One more opportunity to wear the uniform comes up over the next couple of weeks, and then it's over. It is a race that ends with a very brickish wall once it reaches its end, and you can certainly testify to that, as a former player as well, of course, as a coach now. Once all the mystique is over, though, a football game broke out, and you had many things you wanted to check off your list, and this was a chance that you could maybe check a few of those things off. And one of the things I know you wanted was to establish the run and to be determined to be able to move the football on the ground. Fits and spurts throughout the year. You've certainly shown the ability to do it, but consistency has been the thing you've been looking for. What did you think about the progress toward consistency in your running game?
I thought we made some progress. There were still some certain things, especially between the tackles, that I think we could do better. The guys noticed that before we even got to film. I got text over the weekend with clippings of the game saying, "Coach, sorry about this. I see where I messed up." So that's a positive development, right? Guys are taking it seriously. They're watching it. They're seeing what they're making. They're identifying where they're making mistakes and knowing where the issue is, and and owning it. That's another part of it too. So that's a tough thing, for 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids to do, is to own when they make a mistake sometimes. But we have guys that are doing that right now. And but overall, I thought some guys made some great plays. We're able to kind of, Worcester Tech didn't make it easy on us. They put 9 guys in the box and we're bringing pressure and basically, force us to do the things that we haven't done well consistently all year long. It was a great game plan by them. I think we just had the athletes where we could kind of get outside and get to the perimeter and make some big runs there. Then we were able to soften them up a little bit with some inside runs, and when we had to, we made some plays throwing the football. But again, those are things that we had trouble with, consistency wise over the course of the year, and they forced us to look in the mirror and really kind of to make some of those plays that we haven't made. Guys came through and they were able to do that and put points on the board and ultimately win the game.
One of those things I know that you continue to want to work on and improve, that Worcester Tech forced you in the direction of, as you point out, we thought 8 guys in the box on a week in and week out basis was a lot. Putting 9 guys in the box certainly leaves very little of an idea. For those that are not following along with the math, if there are 9 guys inside of that box near the line of scrimmage, that means there's only 2 other players left to cover receivers in a formation, which at best means you're talking about a man-to-man circumstance. That means passing the football, of course, is what they're essentially telling you need to do. when you are, kind of making your adjustments as the game progresses. It seems like that continues to be a place where you are seeing some success and making good throws at some points. And then there are others where throws continue to not quite be where they need to be.
Yeah, and again, it's a work in progress still. Just I think we have to come up with answers to some of these problems that teams are going to prevent. It was the next 2 weeks. What Marlborough is going to do, and then whatever happens in that game after that one. But they're going to force us to kind of play left-handed and counter. We have to be able to throw some things well and be able to move the sticks when when teams do stack the box against us. And that's something that we're going to continue to do throughout practice and create those situations in practice so we can execute and just try to get better at it before Friday and before Thanksgiving.
They're going to make us play left-handed. That's a really great way of looking at this point in the season. And I'm sure every coach starts to feel this to a certain degree, whether you're in this playoff format or you're not. Once you lay down 9 weeks worth of video, and it is more and more and more readily available through every bit of fault of people like myself. But, it does help to spread the video out into the community, aside from the 2 game films that you all do exchange. At this point, there are 9 games on film for everybody, which means there aren't a lot of surprises, which means they know what you do well. And they also, by the same token, know what you don't do well. And I like kind of that way of looking at it, that they're going to tell you have to play this game left-handed or with one hand tied behind your back. And likely it's not going to be your dominant hand when you do it. So at this stage, in a way of transitioning out of 9 and toward week 10, what do you do at this stage? I mean, I know some coaches would say, go to the book, find the nearest gadget, play, and embrace it with all your might. Others would say, dare them to, stop what it is we do well. What's the philosophy? Is it somewhere in between? What's the happy medium at this point in the season?
Well, I mean, I don't believe that you go Mad Hatter on everybody and try to put like all these, and stuff like that. I think you got to have counters to what you do well. And you got to have answers to, you have to have constraint plays that, forces the team to still have to account for, whether you're, running inside really well, you're going to have a perimeter component to that play that's going to be able to answer, when they adjust to it. But, for me, it's really, we're always looking at, formations, what formations are going to give teams problems with what we do well. And try to structure our game plan that way. So that's what we'll do. I think we've given it a different wrinkle every week this year in terms of some of the teams haven't been able to account for. We'll kind of move forward with that. But for us, it starts formationally with what teams do and the personnel that they have. That puts us in the best position to run our plays and what we do well. Against certain favorable numbers in the box for us, or against or 2 favorable personnel matchups.
Before we leave this win from week 9, let's just spend a moment and talk a little bit about defense, because what we had said leading up to that game last week, we really did emphasize, of course, the similarities that you might find in Worcester Tech to some of the other opponents that you've played throughout the year, and your ability to hopefully be able to build a defense around that. How did you feel the defensive performance benefited from some of that? And what did you see in your defense last week?
Well, we saw our defense, really, against some of the teams that we've had earlier this year. We had trouble really kind of attacking the line of scrimmage when we diagnose a run, and just kind of waiting for the run to get to us and catching things a little bit too, where now I felt we played with a lot more confidence defensively. We were able to kind of shoot the alleys, make plays when it looked like the play was going to bounce outside. I think Ricky Encarnacion had a really good game. I thought our outside linebackers had a really good game in terms of keeping things contained. I think defensive line wise, there's still some work that we have to do there. I think the guys played really, really well in terms of their effort, in terms of their motor. Technique wise, there are some things that we got to improve on. They had one drive there where they moved the ball on us when that went down and got points. And, we had made some adjustments after that. And, we were able to kind of shut things down a little bit more after that. But I liked the effort and the attitude that we played with, and certainly starting to play with some more confidence. Guys coming downhill and playing a lot more aggressive than we've played in the last couple of weeks.
And that, of course, comes with the experience as well as with the development over time. And that last piece that you threw in there, which is about building confidence. And confidence you did build. 34-6 final score. Leominster over Worcester Tech in week 9. Leominster improves their overall record to 3-6 on the 2021 season. Worcester Tech falls to 7-2. As we advance kind of our way ahead, Coach, before we completely leave week 9, of course, you've had an opportunity to look across the landscape here and see what happened in this first week of this new playoff system. And certainly, you know, I was out covering the Westfield-Fitchburg game last week. That certainly was a different football game than maybe I expected, a little bit more low scoring, a little bit more defensively minded, and a game that certainly ended in a very narrow fashion. But it wasn't the only game that was out there that certainly I thought led to some surprises. For me, I would say some of the headlines that I took away from last week include a Grafton football team that, of course, your opponent this week got to see again, just continues to find ways to win football games and really seemingly, you know, you used the word diagnose a minute ago, seemingly diagnose what the offense that they're going against wants to do and then finds a way defensively to stop it while also continuing to rack up the points and basically daring you to keep up with them in the race.
They're a wagon. They really, really are. I just watching when we've had, you know, a lot of the teams we played this year had them on the schedule. So we've seen a lot of Grafton film, and, you know, their quarterback and the running back is, you know, they're the real deal. And they don't do a heck of a lot in terms of, you know, their playbook. They block things up the right way, and they let, you know, the quarterback and the running back just find the holes and go. And I tell you, they have great vision, and they have great speed, and they have great athleticism. And anytime you can block the guys up front and get them singled up with, you know, corners or safeties in space, then you're going to have some big time plays. And you know, they really, really are a good football team.
So the next question, the next headline I have, I suppose, coming out of this first week of playoff action, of course, we have been singing the praises of Central Massachusetts and demanding better representation for Central Massachusetts. And when you look at the overall numbers, aside from Division I, where Central Mass really did seemingly hold their own, only Shrewsbury fell out of that group. There's a lot of Central Mass teams that are no longer a part of the playoff format and are now part of the non-playoff format. What can we take away? Does this further prove the point that maybe the representation could have been better, that the right teams or wrong teams didn't make the circumstance, didn't make the playoffs? Would it have been different if there was a larger sample size? What can we read into? Obviously, we've been, you know, kind of rattling the saber for weeks on end here about the need for representation in Central Mass and Western Mass, for that matter. There aren't many of those left in what remains in each of the 8 divisions.
No, and I think, you know, I kind of go back to, you know, the conversation we had, I believe it was last week, about, you know, the power ratings. And, you know, I think there needs to be another, you know, measurable in there that can help with the strength of schedule to, you know, get things a little bit more accurate, to be able to get the matchups that, you know, I think are, you know, the best matchups. You know, anytime you have 16 teams, you got a 1 against a 16 or a 2 against a 15, you might get some lopsided scores. I know this was the concern of a lot of the coaches going into this format. Instead of going, you know, the 8-team bracket and going 16 bracket, they were worried about some, you know, some blowouts and whatnot. But it is kind of the nature of, you know, a 16-team bracket too. Again, I don't have the answers for this at all, Todd. And you know, I really gotta, you know, once the season's over, kind of look at, you know, the system as a whole. I haven't really had a lot of time to kind of go through and see, you know, look at every team in the bracket. And, you know, I know there definitely were some really good competitive games out there. I know Methuen beating Everett was a real big one there too. So there are circumstances where that happens. So it's tough to really, you know, you can't paint it with a broad brush here. You have there are intricacies. There are, you know, certain things that really just need to get, you know, looked at with a fine-tooth comb and see if there's anything that we can do for improvement that is not like wholesale changes or, you know, overly or anything like that. So my short answer is, Todd, I have no idea.
What does it tell us? We have no clue. Grab your magic 8 ball.
That was a long-winded way for me to say I have no clue.
Here's what I took away from it. This was my takeaway, at least setting up the game, obviously, that I was covering. It was a 5-12 matchup between Fitchburg and Westfield. That's the way it was laid out on the bracket. I didn't see going into the game, and certainly I think a 7-6 final score bared that out. The difference between a 5-line and a 12-line in this format versus, I think, when people look at a 64-team basketball tournament with the NCAA or even the 32 teams in other high school sports, I think there's a much further distance between 1 and 32 than there is between 5 and 12 in a 16-team bracket. It just doesn't feel like those lines are as far apart as they may be in the quality of those two teams.
Sure, I could support that for sure. Yeah, and obviously, the level of competition comes into play here too. And Westfield went out and executed against the team the schedule that they had. Their defense played really well all year long, so they're sure that margin of victory, definitely that variable there played a big part in the way they were seeded. Because and again, there's only 2 Division III teams out there in Western Mass with Holyoke and in Minnetonka, and they played Springfield Central tough. So they did what they had to do, given their schedule, and it's tough. Sometimes it's comparing apples and oranges with some of the different regions here, but they went out there, they held their own. They kept Quendo in check, and they were able to to squeak it out.
As I also get to tie a little bit of the college into this conversation, because I've been thinking about what I've been seeing since college football put out their first set of rankings, and my adoptive Bearcats, who got the royal porking from the committee to put them in the 6th position in the first brackets. I think the thing they kept hearing about, and you keep hearing the national TV folks discuss, is quality losses. I feel like the MIA really is embracing those quality losses and not so much embracing wins of any kind. And we continue to see that.
A lot of that going around. Yeah.
it seems to be a thing.
I mean, I've watched Cincinnati come this year, and I feel like they definitely deserve to be in that top 4 there. They've proven it so far. I'd like to see him, give him a chance. And, every week it seems like, a number 2 or a number 3 is getting knocked out. So, hopefully, by the end of the season, they find themselves in that position to be able to take advantage of that. So I'd like to see them in there. I think that'd be a really good story, and I think they're going to compete.
Absolutely. I think that's the direction we need to see things turn as we move ahead, Coach, to week 10 action. Leominster and Marlborough. This has been a series that it goes in fits and spurts. It is a long-standing series. If you just look at the 2010s, moving on into the 2020s, it kind of comes in threes. 3 Leominster wins, followed by 3 Marlborough wins. Then you get a couple of smatterings, that are outliers to that point. But Marlborough has a slight edge in the 7 meetings, a 4-3 edge, but an edge in overall points scored by a pretty significant differential, which, of course, if you take anything to mean past performance has anything to do with future success, we can lay that out as well. But it certainly feels like in these football games, when these teams come together, early success in the football game does a lot to the final outcome of these football games when these two teams get together this late in the year.
Sure, and I think that you could, that trend is probably going to continue with, the type of teams that we both have right there. They're a veer, strong running team, and our strength this year has been running the football. So early success, the quicker you get on the board and have success there, the harder it's going to be for the other team to match and keep up. So, I'd say that trend is probably bound to continue, and we're just hoping that we can go out there and execute early and be that team that jumps out.
We talked a little bit off air about the veer, but we'll give people a little glimpse on the distinctive differences. I mean, aside from being a fan of Remember the Titans and knowing Sunshine needed to set the edge and make the pitch, aside from those things about the veer, it's not necessarily one that's so common in this region as far as, the different teams. There are different ideas, I suppose. But if you were to best compare the veer to some of the other things you guys have seen this year, is it distinctively different, or is it somewhat similar, maybe with just slightly different principles?
I don't think it's, each aspect of it, I think we've seen from other teams this year, just not compiled into one offensive package, and their offensive backfield set, isn't something that we normally see in terms of the 2 split backs with a quarterback under center, and being able to run option, being able to run belly, being able to run toss from that whole set. So they're really strictly in that two back under center set. And that's really, indicative of, traditional beer teams. And they do a really good job of it. They don't think the quote, and remember the Titans, is it's like Novocaine, just give it time and it's going to win, it's going to work. And,
Mhm.
they certainly live by that mantra. They stick with it, and they run it and they run it and they run it well. And they know how to count, take away certain things. So, we're certainly going to have to keep pace and be able to play tough up front, because as soon as we, become complacent, that's when their big run pops, and we have to make sure that we're in every play, we're in every moment, and, reading our keys, and making sure that we're, attacking it the best that we can every single down.
Nobody enjoys another good factor like I do, which is, of course, as it turns out, this would be the week that you would play an opponent with a natural surface, and the weather is going the way of, gather two of every animal, and seemingly getting worse by the hour. So it's going to be a wet night. It's going to be a wet night on a natural surface, which usually means mud. And it's not something, because of where Central Massachusetts has gone and the good fortune programs have had, there are very limited facilities that have a natural surface anymore. So when you get a team like yours who doesn't necessarily traditionally play on a natural surface, you practice on one, at least for the current situation, but you don't play on one regularly. How do you try to prepare a team who maybe doesn't face, the muddy football all the time? You can face a slick football, but a muddy football, how do you prepare that into your game plan? Do you even bother? Or you just say, you know what, we're all going to have to deal with it at some point, and mud's mud?
I can tell you, Todd, that no one has practiced more with the muddy football than we have this year. I can tell you that. Practice on those fields behind the high school, they are traditionally wet, and usually if it rains one day a week, that field is wet the whole entire week. So it's not something that we are, not accustomed to, because we've had to do it every single week. This has been a wet fall. And that means that those fields up there have been wet pretty much the whole entire time. So we've practiced in plenty of wet conditions. We've practiced, with plenty of wet and muddy footballs. It's something that our kids have just dealt with, and we talked about ball security. We talked about it's going to be a big issue, at our film session today. But it's not something that we're going to harp on more than we already have in terms of the way we've practiced. And our guys know what that feels like. They've been in the situation before. So it's something that we're going to be ready for.
In addition, of course, to the ball security. And I suppose ball security gets to be number one when you have these kinds of conditions. And then number two, right behind that, has got to be footing, which, of course, kind of, if you are trying to get a push on the line, if you're trying to cut and move, it is far less predictable in a wet, sloppy scenario than it would be in a turf scenario, which you can still have slick, but again, doesn't have that underlayer, that mud that you're sinking into as you're trying to cut or push out on the field.
It's going to be the same for both teams. Usually in those situations, obviously the edge goes to the offense. I mean, they know where they're going, and the defense has to react. So, we'll deal with that when it comes up here, but it's not anything that like I said, we haven't dealt with this year. But again, it's going to be the same for both teams. I don't think it gives either one of us an advantage, disadvantage. We're both going to be two running offenses that are going to go out there and try to get after each other, and it might just end up being a slugfest in the mud, which, in early November, it sounds like a fun Friday night.
I was going to say, this was kind of the way football went prior to synthetic turf, right? That was how this was supposed to go at this time of year. And of course, it comes at I will say, an interestingly beneficial time, at the risk on this episode of even turning you toward your game in the future. But it does come at a very interesting time that your next two and final games this year will both be played on a natural surface that, as you get to this point in the year, begin to degrade more and more and more as the weeks go by.
Sure. Yeah. And again, it's not something that, is a concern of ours. Given, the way we've practiced and the surface that we've had to, push through, this fall. It's been a real, if you've ever been up there, the fields behind the high school, aren't forgiving. whether it be, rocks and, hard ground, or in this case, when it rains, there's a lot of clay up there. So water doesn't go anywhere really fast. So it all stays up there. And, our guys have practiced pretty much in every, non-favorable condition, that you could have in a season already. So it's not going to be anything that we haven't seen or haven't had to push through and execute. And it's not something that we're going to make a big deal out of. It's certainly something that we're going to talk about and account for it, and try to go over our footing. But we're going to practice on grass. We're going to try to get some practices on grass. Again, we always obviously want to use Doyle when we can, and if other sports are that schedule clears up, we'll be on Doyle a little bit too. But we're still going to practice on grass and make sure that we get the feel for the footing, what it's going to be like.
And it will be interesting to see as the years go by, in case anybody questions the need for the construction project that is being currently planned and undertaken. One need only take a casual stroll around those 3 fields that are up there and recognize the need for the program, not just football, the athletic program. I would go right to the physical education program of the school district that would explain why you need it. Because what you're describing existed 18 years ago, and I can only imagine 18 years later, not much has changed if it hasn't already gotten worse in that circumstance.
No, for sure. We pride ourselves on athletics here, being competitive in whatever sport it is in Leominster. And I feel like that's something that is sorely needed to test our athletic programs, and just the physical well-being of the students in Leominster too, with it being of the phys ed, being able to use it and whatnot. So obviously sorely needed. I've spoken at the school committee meetings about it, or about the at the city council meetings about it, and it's sorely needed for our student athletes and just our student population in Leominster for sure.
It checks off one more abutter that we don't have to get a sign off on as we move forward as well. Thank you as always, Leominster High School head coach Devin Gates. So we will be back next week with another edition of the Coach's Corner a little later in the week, as we kind of are in that transition week between the regular season and of course the Thanksgiving season ahead. So you keep it tuned right here to facebook.com/Rivalry Family Media or facebook.com/Media Rivalry. Wow, out of practice on that. Facebook.com/Media Rivalry for your information for this RFM coverage. And of course, part of our pre-Thanksgiving program. We'll have that Thanksgiving edition of the Coach's Corner coming up next week as well. Week 10 action comes your way this Friday night, Kelleher Field in Marlborough. No weather to worry about in the sense that this football game is going to be played on Friday night. Weather be darned. So rain, snow, sleet, or dead of night, it will all be a possibility coming up on Friday night. Dress accordingly. Come on out, support these great high school football athletes that will be competing on Friday night at Kelleher Field. It is scheduled for a 7 o'clock kickoff. Leominster will travel to Marlborough. We'll have your countdown to kickoff on the air on the K-Zone at 6 o'clock. Billy, Kate, and I back together for one united broadcast at 6 o'clock coming up on Friday night with your 1 hour countdown to kickoff. Kickoff follows at 7, and we'll be there with you with the weather covered, along with, of course, a fantastic football game. For Leominster High School head coach Devin Gates, I am Todd Robbins, reminding you that each and every week does not start until you hear the preview right here on Coach's Corner. Until next week, so long, everybody.